plasma!
Thomas here with Much Props, going to give you another how-to video. Today I thought we'd take a trip to nostalgia back to 1994, and there was a very weird video game that came out of an earthworm who got a robotic body and went around killing bad guys. I'm talking about Earthworm Jim, and I thought it would be kind of fun to do a blaster like he had back there in the old days. Put a little bit of dirt and grime and stuff on it in my typical style and just have a little bit of fun with it. So today we are building an Earthworm Jim blaster. Let's get to building. So I found this blaster in a phone app I sometimes use for reference images called Sketchfab. The model was made by someone named Josh, but in 3D. I looked at a lot of the older versions in the game and really liked his take on the blaster. So I'm going to start with his as inspiration and then deviate from it a little, pulling it back towards the original and putting on my own added parts. I templated out the pattern that you can download for free down in the description below the video. I traced mine onto some 6mm EVA foam and cut it out. For my blaster front, the panel on the model was a little bit more complicated, so I switched it to a more classic look. I burnt in the lines using my ruler and a wood burner, then just glued the trim overlay over the top. Make sure to wear a respirator and work in a well-ventilated area while burning and sanding EVA foam. You don't want to breathe in fumes or dust particles. With the front panel now layered, I can go ahead and assemble the blaster body. All my edges have contact cement on them, and after a couple of minutes, I begin tacking them together. I like to start by closing up the large darts first, then using the registration marks on the edges, attach the pieces flush on the outside. If you accidentally get too proud on an edge, you can always go back and sand it later. The handle is pretty straightforward. I marked the placement of the base and slathered the joining edges with contact cement like in the previous step. To keep my alignment straight, I just eyeball it against seam lines and registration marks that are still visible. Since my build won't have electronics or lights in it, I wasn't too concerned about reinforcing the handle, as the prop will only weigh a few ounces when finished. If you decide to add functionality to yours, you may want to consider reinforcing the handle with a wire or something. So here's a slight change again for my reference image. It has the front end of the gun tapering down at the end. Once again, I wanted to switch that back to more like the original shape from the game. I did, however, like the ridges at the end of their blaster, so I cut a couple strips, taped them down to some painter's tape, and contact cemented both the edges and the strips. I also cut down 10mm EVA dowels in half to make some ridges as well. My reference image had these cool fins that came off the top and sides, so I decided to keep those. Instead of trying to cut out bevels or sand away for hours, I used some 20mm triangle dowels and then cut off one side on the bottom so that it would taper as it moved back to the butt of the gun. I chunked up the barrel end emitter from the original design to make it a little sturdier. I used an EVA cone and just cut the end off to glue my rounded tip. I took a scrap piece of some 36mm EVA foam and rounded it off on one side. An alternative to this could be using a ping pong ball or something spherical. I thought originally that I was going to put a bullet light inside a ping pong and stick that on the tip, but I didn't have any more bullet lights on hand.
Here I am adding some raised panels that I'm assuming are like charge readouts or something. If you wanted to go a little fancier, you could cut out this area and put some lights in and then sandwich some film in between it and the base, but I was kind of crunched for time and decided to just paint on the look instead inside the frames. After having everything assembled, I kind of thought the handles looked a little dull, so I decided to give them a quick little pistol grip using the ruler again and the wood burner. Once I had it glued on, I carved down with a sanding drum, pulled out a little to make some faux rivets. I'm digging the shape of it so far, and I think it's ready for paint now. Two coats of Plasti-Dip. Instead of a pristine new blaster, I decided to make it a little battle worn, so I laid down a light mist of silver spray paint as a base layer. Before I started this step, I clear coated my base paint job. I wanted my blaster to look like it had chipped paint in areas. To mask off the spray paint, I'm using some toothpaste. You can pretty much use any gel-like substances. You can even go as far as to buy masking liquids at the hobby store. We have tons of these little travel-sized toothpaste containers on hand, and I thought, why not just use them? Plus, it makes your prop smell minty fresh. You just lather it on in the areas you don't want the paint to stick to, and then paint over the top of it. I put it heaviest on edges and areas that the gun would be bumped up against or would see the most action. Once covered, I hit it with some red spray paint. Now I just take off the taped areas, and with a wet brush and paper towel I rub off the toothpaste. Scrubbing and wiping all the raised areas reveal the silver underneath and gives you that chipped metal magic look. For the rest of the detail, I just hand painted on some Platifix acrylic paint. It took 2 or 3 coats with the lighter colors of gold and yellow. The grip was black and it went through in one pass. I realized the barrel end of the blaster in most of the game designs are yellow or gold, but I wanted it to contrast a little bit with the front end of the gun, so I left the aged metal look on it and then painted the tip white.
And we are finished. Here is the end result. Overall, not too bad. It took me roughly 3 hours total to build it and plasti dip it, then another hour and a half or so to paint it. So literally in less than 6 hours from start to finish, and that includes templating and recording, I was able to knock this thing out. Not a bad build, relatively light, pretty simple shapes, so something that definitely a beginner could do, and if you wanted to, put your own spin on an old school blaster and kind of have fun with it. So maybe you'll try and build one of these yourselves and impress your friends with your ability to make something from a video game that you played back in the 90s and you're like, oh, that's super cool and super funny and not that hard to build. Yeah. Maybe you'll get some. Yay! And inevitably, they're going to ask you, how'd you make that? You can give them one of these. Tell them, much props. I guess I gotta shoot you, so. Freeze, fool!
If you enjoyed this trip down nostalgia lane and would like to see more builds like this one, please consider joining these awesome people listed here with me over on my Patreon to build a bigger, better, more creative community together.